He stood up without looking, and in seconds everything came crashing down. Broken plates, silence in the restaurant, and a waitress, trembling in front of him. Then he did what he always did. He yelled and humiliated. "You're incompetent. You should be fired." She tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. And maybe that was the biggest mistake of his life, because that same day he lost his voice, and also the ability to hear. Now trapped in absolute silence, there was only one person he could hear, the same woman he humiliated. But the question wasn't whether she could help him, it was whether she'd be willing to help someone who destroyed her. Marcus Reed was 38 years old, and in those 38 years, he had never lost anything that truly mattered, or so he believed. He was the kind of man who walked into a room, and everyone felt him before they saw him. Not because he was particularly charming, but because he carried with him an energy that filled the space before he did. Something heavy, something urgent, something that said, without words, "I'm in charge here, and I don't have time to waste." CEO of Reed Development Group, a real estate development company with 20 years in the market, offices on the 14th floor of a glass tower in the heart of downtown Hartfield, contracts across 6 states, and a reputation built on results and on never taking no for an answer. Marcus had gotten there on his own. No inheritance, no family connections, just work, hard decisions, and a discipline that was sometimes indistinguishable from coldness. He had no time for rest. He had no patience for inefficiency, and he had no awareness of how much space his personality occupied in the lives of the people around him. To him, employees fulfilled functions. Partners were strategic tools. The restaurants where he ate were simply places where business got done. And the people who served him in those places were part of the furniture. That morning started the way they all did. 5:30, black coffee, no sugar, brewed automatically while he was already checking the first emails of the day. No breakfast, no news that didn't relate to the market or his projects, no conversation, because he had lived alone for 5 years and didn't miss anyone, or at least, that's what he told himself. He rode the elevator down with his phone pressed to his ear. He walked past the doorman without looking at him. He crossed the lobby while the woman mopping the floor stepped aside to let him pass, and he didn't even notice the gesture, invisible to him, as they always were. His driver waited at the curb. Marcus got into the car and kept talking on the phone for the 30 minutes it took to get downtown. By the time he arrived at the office, he had already made 2 decisions and cancelled a meeting he considered unnecessary. It was Tuesday, and Tuesdays meant a business lunch. The restaurant was called the Millstone Kitchen. It sat on a quiet street in Hartfield's historic district, between an antique bookshop and a small pottery studio. From the outside it looked modest, but inside it had the generous warmth of places that were built with intention. Dark wood, potted plants on the windowsills, hand-stitched cloth napkins, and a smell coming from the kitchen that made anyone think of a grandmother's Sunday table, even if they'd never had one. Eugene Calloway had run the Millstone Kitchen for 22 years. He was 64, with the hands of someone who had worked his whole life and a way of being present in every corner of the restaurant that made no one feel overlooked. He knew the names of his suppliers, his cooks, his servers, and most of his regular customers. He remembered birthdays. He knew which elderly gentleman always asked for the booth by the window, and which woman liked her soup without salt. For Eugene, that restaurant wasn't a business. It was his life, and the people who worked there were his family. Valeria Santos had been part of that family for 4 years. She'd arrived at 27 with a short resume and a long story. She was a single mother, lived with her daughter and her mum, needed a job with a schedule that would let her be home before 10 at night, and was willing to learn whatever was necessary. Eugene hired her that same day, not because he needed the help, but because there was something in the way that young woman held herself straight throughout the entire interview, back upright, eyes clear, not asking for sympathy or hiding her situation, that told him everything he needed to know about who she was. 4 years later, Valeria Santos was the person Eugene trusted most in his entire restaurant. She was 31 years old. And if the years she'd spent carrying everything alone had a visible weight, you'd see it in her hands, always moving, always doing something useful, but not in her face. In her face, there was a lightness that didn't match everything her life asked of her every single day. Her daughter Sophia was 12 years old. She was a preteen in every sense of the word. No longer a little girl, not quite a teenager, navigating that in-between territory with a self-assurance that sometimes made Valeria wonder if the wrong mold had been used at the factory of life. Sophia was direct, curious, a compulsive reader, and had a way of looking at adults that made you feel like you were being evaluated without prior notice. Donna, Valeria's mother, was 61, with knee pain that had kept her from working for the past 2 years. She lived with them, helped where she could, and was the emotional anchor of that small, lively home. 3 women, a small apartment, 1 paycheck, and every month, the next one. That was what Valeria held together, and she held it together without complaining. That afternoon, when Marcus Reed walked into the Millstone kitchen with 2 associates, and that energy that filled every room before he arrived, Valeria was in the middle of her shift. It had been a busy day, a table that took too long to leave, a wrong order she'd had to remake, and feet that were already protesting at 2 in the afternoon. But she kept going. She always kept going. She loaded the tray with 4 plates, 2 bowls of soup, and a pitcher of water. Heavy, yes, but it was something she'd done hundreds of times. She walked carefully between the tables, watching the path ahead, weaving between chairs, focused. What she couldn't see was that Marcus Reed was about to stand up at exactly that moment. His phone buzzed, a call he considered urgent. He stood without turning around, without warning, completely certain that the world around him would move to accommodate him, as it always did. Marcus's shoulder hit Valeria's tray with a force neither of them expected. Time froze. And then everything fell. The plates shattered against the floor with an enormous crash. The soup, the water, everything over Marcus's light grey suit, which cost more than Valeria earned in a month. The noise was so unexpected in that quiet restaurant that every customer turned at the same moment. Silence. Valeria stood with her hands still in the air where the tray had been, eyes wide, heart in her throat. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. It was an accident. Marcus looked down. His suit, his shirt, the soup dripping from his tie, and then he looked at the woman in front of him. And something ignited. It wasn't the food, it wasn't the suit. It was everything he'd been carrying that day, that week, that month. It was the tense morning meeting, the call that had just been interrupted, that constant weight of having to control everything all the time, without anyone ever thanking him for it. And Valeria was right there, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. "What did you do?" he said through his teeth, and his voice had that low temperature that is worse than shouting. "Sir, it was an accident. I was walking and you stood up and—" "An accident?" he repeated, and this time his volume rose. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs? Any idea what you just interrupted? Sir, please, let me help you." "Don't touch me." Marcus stepped back. "What kind of waitress are you? Is this how things work here? This is completely unprofessional." People in the restaurant were watching, some with discomfort, some with pity. No one said a word. Eugene came out of the kitchen when he heard the crash. He reached the table in seconds, took in the scene, and stepped between them with the calm that only comes from having lived a long life. "Sir, good afternoon," he said. "I understand this was an unpleasant moment. We sincerely apologize. We'll take care of the cost of your suit, of course." "Don't talk to me about costs," Marcus cut him off. "This is incompetence. This woman is a hazard to your customers. If you run this place, you should know your staff isn't up to standard." Valeria pressed her lips together. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't cry right there. She wasn't going to give him that. "This person should be fired," said Marcus, looking at Eugene with the certainty of someone who doesn't expect to be contradicted. Immediately, Eugene didn't move an inch. "With all due respect, sir," he said with the same calm as before, "that is my decision. And Valeria is one of my best employees." Marcus held his gaze for a second. Then he let out a short, contemptuous sound. "Suit yourself," he said. "I won't be coming back here." Without waiting for a response, he signaled to his associates, picked up his jacket and walked out. The door of the Millstone kitchen closed behind him, and the silence that remained was different from the one before. Eugene bent down to pick up the broken pieces of plate. Then he stood up, put a hand on Valeria's shoulder, and guided her to the kitchen without saying a word. He put a glass of water in front of her. "That wasn't your fault," he said. "I know," she answered, "but it still hurts." The old man nodded slowly. "People who do that," he started, glancing toward the restaurant door, "are usually more lost than we are. They just don't know it yet." Valeria nodded. And it was there, leaning against the kitchen wall that smelled of roasting garlic and something slow cooking on the stove, that she let fall a single tear, just one. and she wiped it away fast, because she still had tables to attend. What Marcus didn't know in that moment was that that day wasn't over for either of them. The afternoon meeting had been tense before it even started. Reed Development Group had been under pressure for weeks over a project on the east side of the state that wasn't moving the way it should. David Farrell, one of the founding partners, arrived with a proposal that directly contradicted the strategy Marcus had approved weeks earlier. And Marcus Reed did not tolerate being contradicted, especially when he believed he was right. The conference room on the 14th floor had a view of the entire city. 8 people around a long mahogany table, folders open, laptops on. Laura, the executive assistant, took notes with that quiet efficiency she had and that no one ever thanked her for enough. The discussion started formally and escalated in under 10 minutes. "Marcus, the numbers speak for themselves," said David, with that confidence that was sometimes substance and sometimes just ego. "The vendor I'm proposing cuts costs by 31% and compromises material quality on a project that already has structural concerns," Marcus replied. "That's not savings, David. That's a lawsuit we're waiting to happen. You're being too conservative." "I'm being correct," Marcus cut him off, and his voice dropped to that tone everyone in the room recognized as a danger signal. "And on this team, when I say something doesn't work, it doesn't work." David opened his mouth. Marcus stood up. "This company is not going to compromise its reputation for short-term savings. That is my judgment, and it is the one that—" And then he stopped. A hum, first soft, like radio static rising in volume without anyone having touched anything. He felt his neck go rigid, as if every muscle had decided to tighten at once, his hands suddenly cold for no reason. A pressure in his chest that wasn't exactly pain, but wasn't normal either. "Marcus," said David, and his voice was already coming from far away. The room tilted, the table came up too fast, and Marcus Reed, the man who had never lost, fell. Dr. Sandra Okoye at Hartfield Regional Medical Center was 45 years old, with 18 years of experience, and a way of delivering difficult news that was direct without being cruel. "Severe vasovagal episode with neurological impact from accumulated stress," she said. "Your body sent a signal you had been ignoring for a long time, Mr. Reed." Marcus was in the hospital bed with electrodes still attached, looking at the doctor with the eyes of someone processing something that doesn't fit their idea of themselves. He tried to say something. He opened his mouth. Nothing. Just air. Just the motion of speaking without the sound that should have followed. And then he noticed something else. The doctor's lips were moving, but he heard nothing. He looked around. David was at the door of the room, talking to someone on the phone. Silence. The monitor next to his bed showed numbers in motion, but made no sound. Silence. A nurse crossed the hallway outside. Her shoes should have made noise on the linoleum floor, but silence. Absolute silence, as if someone had switched off the sound of the entire world. Marcus Reed went completely still. For the first time in 38 years, he was locked inside his own body. The doctor noticed his expression and picked up a notepad from her coat pocket. She wrote in clear letters and held it up to him. Temporary aphonia and hearing loss from severe stress. The nervous system had a collapse response, could last days or weeks. With rest and treatment, recovery is possible. Marcus read those words. He read them once, twice, 3 times. Days or weeks. He looked at the window of the room. The city outside kept moving. Cars, people, life that went on without pausing, without caring that in that hospital room a man had just lost the 2 things he used most to exist in the world, his voice and his ability to hear. The first days were a lesson no one had asked him to learn. The hospital discharged him on the 3rd day with strict instructions. Complete rest, no stress, weekly medical follow-up. David came to pick him up. He took Marcus's phone, typed something, and handed it back. "Rest, we've got everything covered." Marcus read that, and instead of feeling relief, he felt something he wasn't used to feeling, dispensable, as if the company he had built over 20 years was continuing without him without even stumbling. He spent 4 days locked in his apartment. 4 days of total silence, walls that didn't speak, a television that was useless without sound, a phone he could only use to type messages that reached people who responded in haste, as if communicating with him was an extra burden. For the first time in his adult life, he depended on others to communicate, to understand what was happening in his own meetings, to know whether someone had spoken to him or was simply ignoring him. And that devastated him more than any business failure he had ever had. because this wasn't a problem that could be solved with decisions. It was a problem that was inside him, somewhere he couldn't control, and Marcus Reed had never known what to do with things he couldn't control. 1 week after his discharge, something happened that nobody could have predicted. The doctor had told him that prolonged isolation was counterproductive, that the brain needed stimulation, that going out, walking, being in contact with the world even in silence, helped the recovery process. Marcus went out to walk. No destination, no phone. He left the phone at the apartment because carrying it and not being able to really use it weighed on him in a different way than anything else. He walked through the streets of downtown Hartfield. People passed by him. Cars went past. Everything moved in that silence that had become familiar, even if no less heavy. He didn't know at what point his feet led him toward the Millstone kitchen. Maybe it was the smell coming from the kitchen when he passed the street. Maybe it was simply that his body, on autopilot, was looking for the last place where he had been fine before everything changed. For Marcus, what had happened with the waitress was something that had happened, an inconvenience. Humiliating someone was so ordinary in his daily life that it left no mark. It was simply another moment of another day. He went in. The same smell, the same dark wood, the same plants on the windowsills. He sat at a table near the wall and waited. The one who came to wait on him was Valeria. She recognized him instantly. Her steps paused for a fraction of a second. Just that. One heartbeat. Then they continued, because Valeria Santos was not someone who ran from difficult things. "Good afternoon," she said. "What can I get you?" And then something completely inexplicable happened. Marcus heard her, not as a memory, not as imagination. He heard her, real, clear, vivid, as if she was speaking directly from inside his head. Every syllable perfect. Marcus blinked. He went completely still. He looked around the restaurant. At the table next to him, 2 women were chatting animatedly. Silence for him. A child ran between the tables yelling something. Silence. The low music coming from somewhere near the kitchen. Silence. But her voice, he heard it with perfect clarity. "Are you all right, sir?" asked Valeria. And those 4 words were like cold water after days of desert. Marcus reached into his pocket for his phone. He typed with fingers that weren't trembling even though they should have been. "I lost my voice and my hearing a week ago. I can't hear anyone, but I just heard you. Only you." Valeria read the message. She frowned. She looked at him. "You can hear me?" "Me?" He nodded. "Only me?" He nodded again. Valeria looked around the restaurant, then back at him. And in that moment, something moved inside her that she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something more complex, more uncomfortable, more honest than either of those things. "Wait here," she said. She went straight to the kitchen. Eugene was going over the day's inventory with his reading glasses on and his usual notepad. Valeria told him everything in a low voice, glancing toward the dining room through the pass-through window. The old man listened without interrupting her. Then he looked toward where Marcus was sitting. "And what are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know, Eugene. He's the same man who—" "I know who he is," he interrupted gently. "The question isn't who he is. The question is who you are." Valeria gripped the kitchen towel between her hands. She looked toward the dining room. "I'm going to see what he needs." Marcus told her everything in writing, the hospital, the diagnosis, the days of silence locked in his apartment, the desperation of not being able to communicate with anyone, and the moment, exact, of hearing her voice and not being able to believe what was happening. At the end, he wrote something that took longer than normal to type. "I know I have no right to ask you anything, but I need to go to the doctor to understand what's happening. Would you come with me?" Valeria read that message. Inside, the part of her that remembered that day perfectly, that remembered the trembling in her own hands and the tear she'd wiped in the kitchen, wanted to say no. But she looked at him and saw for the first time something she hadn't seen in him when she'd seen him before. Vulnerability. Real. Without calculation. Without control. "My shift ends in 40 minutes, she said. Marcus nodded, and something in his expression was the closest thing to a thank you he had probably managed in years. Dr. Okoye received them that same afternoon. She ran the tests with her characteristic thoroughness. She asked several people to speak to Marcus from different distances. Nothing. Complete silence. Then she asked Valeria to say something. Marcus pointed toward her immediately, eyes wide. The doctor repeated the exercise 6 times. The result was always the same. Marcus's brain responded only to Valeria Santos's voice. The doctor rubbed her chin. She took extensive notes, and she called them into her office. Medicine doesn't always have answers for everything, she began, choosing her words. What we're seeing is an unusual, but not entirely unprecedented neurological response. The brain, under severe and sustained trauma, sometimes anchors itself to a specific stimulus as a protective mechanism, a frequency, a voice. Something that, for reasons we don't yet fully understand, the nervous system identifies as safe. And what does that mean for treatment? Asked Valeria. It means that for now your voice is the only functional communication channel for Mr. Reed, said Dr. Okoye. And that brings me to a suggestion I'd like you both to consider carefully. She paused. Mr. Reed, what you need in this process is not just medication and rest. You need a companion, someone present in your daily life, someone who can be your bridge to the world, at appointments, in meetings, in social situations. She turned to Valeria. Ms. Santos, would you consider taking on that role in a formal paid capacity? Valeria didn't answer immediately. She looked at the doctor, then at Marcus, then at her own hands resting on her legs, and she said nothing. On the walk back, they moved in silence. Valeria looked straight ahead. Marcus looked at her. When they reached the door of the Millstone kitchen, he took out his phone and held it toward her. On the screen was a single line. I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know what I did to you, and I remember it. Valeria read that. She raised her eyes, and Marcus didn't lower his, didn't look away. He held that gaze with an honesty that didn't fit the man who had walked into this restaurant a week ago. I need to think about it, said Valeria. He nodded, and he left. That night, Valeria arrived home tired in a different way. It was a tiredness that didn't come from her feet or the hours of her shift. It came from inside, from that place where difficult decisions are stored. Donna heard her come in and serve dinner without asking anything, because she knew her daughter better than anyone. Sophia appeared in the kitchen in her striped socks, her hair still damp from the shower. What happened? She asked directly. Valeria looked at her. Why do you always say that when I get home? Because whenever something happens, you come in with a specific face, said Sophia, sitting across from her. And tonight it's really obvious. Donna smiled to herself without saying a word. Valeria told them everything, or almost everything. Enough for Sophia to understand the situation without having to carry more than what was appropriate for her. Sophia listened without interrupting, with that seriousness of hers that was sometimes unsettling coming from someone 12 years old. So the only person who can help him is you. Yes, and you don't want to, because he's the one who made you cry. Yes, Sophia thought for a moment, and then she said with absolute practicality, how much does it pay? Valeria let out an involuntary laugh, one of those that come out without permission. I don't know yet. Then find out, said Sophia without hesitation. Because Grandma needs her knee injections, my school shoes are too small, and last month you had to borrow money for the electric bill. Valeria went quiet. Sophia stood to go to her room and stopped in the doorway. Mum, she said without turning around, you always take care of Grandma and me. Let us help you decide. And she left. Donna put her hand over Valeria's. Neither of them spoke for a moment. What if that man needs to learn something that only you can teach him? Said her mom softly without rushing. Valeria looked at the table. I'm afraid he won't change. You can't know that before it happens, honey. I'm afraid he'll change and then go right back to who he was. You can't know that before it happens either. Silence. Donna looked at her with those eyes that had seen many things and were still kind. Don't decide for him. Decide for yourself, for Sophia, for what you all need. Valeria nodded slowly, and in that small kitchen that smelled of reheated dinner and drip coffee, she made her decision. It wasn't about him. It was about the people who depended on her. The next morning, before her shift, she went to talk to Eugene. The old man listened to her completely, hands resting on the counter, eyes calm. Eugene, if I accept this, I'd have to leave here for a while. I know. You know what this place means to me. And you know what you mean to this place, he said. But sweetheart, sometimes life takes us down roads we didn't choose. That doesn't mean we're betraying anything. What if he goes back to being who he was? Eugene looked at her with the patience of someone in no hurry. Then you'll have earned what your family needs. You'll have learned something about yourself, and there will always be a place for you here. Always. Your apron will be hanging on that hook until you decide to come back. Valeria hugged him, hard, the way you hug someone who is family without sharing blood. Take care of yourself, Eugene. You take better care of yourself. She sent Marcus a message that afternoon. I accept, but I have conditions. He responded in less than a minute. Whatever they are. The conditions were clear. A defined schedule, 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening Monday through Friday, with availability for urgent situations agreed upon in advance. Guaranteed days off. A monthly compensation that would let her family genuinely breathe. And a final condition that Valeria typed slowly, choosing every word. I will not tolerate being disrespected, or watching you disrespect anyone in front of me. If that happens, I leave without explanation. Marcus read that last condition. He read it twice, and responded, understood. The first days of living alongside each other were strange for both of them. Marcus's apartment was exactly what Valeria had imagined. Large, perfectly ordered, not a single photograph on the walls. No plants, no object that said anything personal about whoever lived there. A place where someone slept who considered living a secondary activity. Valeria arrived at 8. She made his coffee while he was already checking the first emails of the day. She summarized aloud the important messages, the schedule, the situations that needed his attention. And he listened, always, because hers was the only voice he could hear. That was already something new for Marcus, listening to someone other than himself. The first important meeting came 3 days after they started. The Reed Development Group conference room. 8 people, Marcus at the head of the table, Valeria to his right with a notepad and a composure that unsettled everyone in the room. David looked at her with one eyebrow raised. She ignored him with a naturalness that unsettled him even more. The meeting started. Marcus read lips when he could, but in moments of confusion he looked at Valeria, who whispered to him in a low voice what was being said. Everything went relatively smoothly until the East Side project came up. David presented new numbers with too much confidence. Marcus frowned. His hands started moving. He shook his head. He pointed at the numbers on the screen. Then he pointed at David with a gesture that wasn't exactly cordial and that everyone in the room recognized. Everyone looked at Valeria. She cleared her throat softly. Mr. Reed says he appreciates the team's work on this presentation, she said with perfectly steady calm, and that before making any decision he'd like a joint review of the third quarter data to make sure everyone is working with the most current information. Marcus looked at her. His eyes said clearly, that is not what I was trying to say. Valeria held his gaze without blinking. David, visibly relieved, nodded. Of course. We can set that up for next week. Leaving the conference room, Marcus took her by the arm in the hallway and held his phone up to her face. He had typed with force, "That is not what I said." "I know," she said calmly. "But what you were trying to say would have offended half the room and delayed the project by at least 2 weeks. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. He typed, "Don't do that again." "Fine," said Valeria. "Next time I'll translate exactly what you said. You're wrong and you're an idiot. Does that work better for you?" Silence. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, something appeared on his face that no one in that company had seen in a long time. The beginning of a smile, just the beginning, but it was there. The next test came that same week. Laura, the executive assistant, knocked on the office door with the face of someone who has come to ask for something difficult, and already knows she'll probably be told no. "Mr. Reed," she said, looking toward Valeria because she already understood how things worked, "I need to ask for a few days off. My mom is in the hospital and I don't have anyone to look after her. I know it's a bad time, but—" Marcus heard Valeria's translation, and he reacted immediately. He stood up from his chair. He spread his hands. He pointed at the calendar on the desk, then at the stack of pending work that couldn't wait, then tapped his fingers on the watch on his wrist. Valeria watched him. Then she turned to Laura. "Mr. Reed had already noticed that you haven't used your vacation time in a long while," she said with absolute calm. "He says this is exactly the right moment to take it. Take whatever time you need. Family always comes first." Laura blinked. Her eyes filled. "Really? Really?" confirmed Valeria without turning to look at Marcus. When Laura left with an expression completely different from the one she'd brought in, Marcus stood directly in front of Valeria. His eyes were burning. He typed on the phone hard. "I did not say that." "No," Valeria admitted. "But why didn't you?" Marcus opened his lips, then closed them. Valeria lowered her voice. "You can choose who you want to be in this moment. You have someone in front of you who needs help, and you have the ability to give it to them without it costing you anything that truly matters. Why would you do the opposite?" Marcus threw the phone on the desk and turned toward the window. Valeria waited. "Work can always wait," she said quietly, almost to herself. A mother who needs her daughter by her side can't. Marcus didn't turn around, but he heard her. And something in that sentence settled inside him without asking permission. A few days later, Laura came back. She arrived with eyes still a little tired, but with a different presence. Lighter. She stopped at the office door and said, "Thank you, Mr. Reed. My mom is stable. I don't know how to repay you." Valeria translated in a low voice, and Marcus went completely still. It wasn't the gratitude itself. It was the tone. It was the difference between the mechanical thank you of someone fulfilling a formality and the thank you of someone who genuinely feels something in their chest when they say it. In 38 years of business, no one had ever thanked him like that. They had obeyed him. They had delivered results. They had congratulated him at year-end reviews with backslaps that meant nothing, but like this. Not like this. Marcus stared at the door where Laura had left for a long time. Valeria said nothing. She didn't need to. He met Sophia without anyone planning it. Valeria had to take her mother to a medical appointment that Friday morning, and Marcus had nothing urgent until noon, so they agreed to meet directly at the office at 11. What no one calculated was that Sophia would be released from school early that day for a teachers' conference. She knocked on the door of Marcus's apartment with her backpack on and the confidence of someone who doesn't expect the world to tell her she can't enter somewhere. Marcus opened the door expecting the package delivery he was waiting for. Instead, he found a 12-year-old girl with her hair in a quick ponytail, eyes that were the exact copy of her mother's, and an evaluating expression that stopped him in his tracks. The two of them looked at each other. "You're Mr. Reed," said Sophia. Marcus nodded. "Then you're the one who made my mom cry." It wasn't a question. Marcus slowly reached for his phone. Sophia walked into the apartment as if she'd been given permission, dropped her backpack on the couch with the carelessness of someone 12, sat down, and looked at him with that seriousness of hers that was more uncomfortable than any adult gaze he'd received in a boardroom. "My mom almost never cries," she said, "so what you did must have been pretty bad." Marcus typed on his phone. "You're right, it was." Sophia read that. She frowned. "At least you admit it." There was a silence that wasn't exactly uncomfortable. It was more the kind of silence between two people who are sizing each other up honestly. "My mum says what happened to you might be karma," said Sophia. "I'm not sure I believe in that exactly. But I do think that sometimes the things that happen to us are exactly what we need to learn something we never would have learned any other way." Marcus looked at her. He typed, "How old are you?" 12, she said. "Why?" "Because you talk like you're twice that." Sophia shrugged with the indifference of someone who has heard that before. "My mom works a lot. When there's no one else, you learn fast." Marcus put down his phone for a moment, and in that silence, something shifted between them. Nothing visible, nothing you could point at, but it was there. When Valeria arrived 20 minutes later and found the two of them looking at something on Marcus's laptop, Sophia enthusiastically explaining an article about space exploration she had read that week, and Marcus following along with a genuine attention Valeria hadn't seen in him before, she stopped in the doorway, and something in her chest moved in a way she didn't yet know how to name. The weeks passed. And Marcus Reed began to change. Not all at once, not dramatically. It was in the details that accumulated one on top of another until they formed something different. In the fact that he no longer arrived late to his own meetings out of negligence, because now there was someone reminding him of the time and he, for the first time, felt that it mattered. In the fact that when an employee made a mistake, before reacting, there was a new fraction of a second in him, a pause that hadn't existed before. In the fact that he looked at people, before the people around him were functions, pieces of a system that needed to work well. Now he saw them. He saw that the young man in the mailroom always arrived running because he took 2 buses to get there on time. He saw that the woman who cleaned the offices always brought a bag with her lunch that she heated in the hallway microwave and never sat in any of the waiting room chairs as if she felt she didn't belong in that small space. He saw them. One day he saw a young employee struggling to carry a stack of heavy files down the wrong hallway, looking completely panicked. Marcus stopped. The young man saw him and went rigid, bracing for a reprimand for some reason he didn't even know yet. Marcus took half the files and nodded his head toward the right direction. The young man followed without a word, too surprised to speak. When they reached the right office, Marcus set down the files and walked away without typing anything, without asking for recognition, without expecting anything in return. Valeria, who had seen the whole scene from the hallway, said nothing, but she smiled. One evening, while Valeria was reviewing the next day's schedule and Marcus was at his desk, she saw him pull out a piece of paper. It wasn't a work document. It was a blank sheet. She watched him write something. Stop. Cross it out hard. Start again. He crumpled it and threw it in the trash. He pulled out another sheet. Started again with the same determination. He crumpled that one too. The third sheet met the same fate. Valeria didn't ask anything, but she knew exactly who that letter was for, and she knew that the fact that he couldn't finish it said more than anything he could have written. Without making a sound, she picked up a clean blank sheet and left it on his desk, next to his pen, without saying a word. The next morning when she arrived, the sheet was gone, and Marcus had on his face the quiet expression of someone who had finally closed something that had been open for a long time. Marcus wrote to his sister. He didn't say anything about it to Valeria. He simply one night picked up his phone and found a number he hadn't touched in 3 years. "Hey, it's me. Are you okay?" The response took 2 days. "I thought you were never going to reach out again." It wasn't an easy conversation. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation. It was awkward, honest, imperfect, but it was a beginning. And Marcus, putting his phone away that night, thought that maybe Sophia was right about something. Sometimes the things that happen to us are exactly what we need. One Saturday, when Marcus had no commitments, the three of them went to the farmer's market downtown. Sophia walked ahead, stopping at everything that caught her attention, asking prices, negotiating with a confidence that left the vendors unsure whether to smile or take her seriously. At a stall selling second-hand books stacked without much order, Sophia stopped. She searched with the seriousness of someone looking for something specific, without knowing quite what, and she pulled out a thick book about astronomy with a slightly worn cover. She opened it. She read a page at random, and then she hugged it against her chest, as if it were a treasure she'd just found. Marcus saw it. He pulled out a bill and handed it to the seller without anyone asking him to. Sophia looked at him. She didn't say anything in that moment. They kept walking. On the way back, 3 steps behind Valeria and Marcus, Sophia said in a voice just loud enough for him to hear, "Hey, Mr. Reed." He turned around. "Thank you." And she went back to walking with her book hugged to her chest. Marcus looked at Valeria. She shrugged with that smile she couldn't quite contain. "Welcome to us." It was during that period that Valeria started noticing something different in the way Marcus looked at her. It wasn't the look of someone observing an employee. It was attention, the kind of attention that means someone is genuinely listening, not because they have no other choice, but because they want to. One afternoon, walking back from a medical appointment, Valeria talked about Sophia, about how proud she was of her, about that way she had of seeing the world that sometimes made Valeria wonder who was really the parent in that relationship. Marcus walked beside her and listened, and at one point, for no particular reason, he laughed. No sound yet, just the expression, his eyes brightening for a second in a way Valeria hadn't seen in him before. "What?" she asked, almost smiling herself without quite knowing why. Marcus reached for his phone. "I spent my whole life angry, all the time, about everything and everyone. And you, with everything you carry every single day, you're always smiling." Valeria didn't answer immediately. "Not always," she said finally. "More than me." "How do you do it?" Valeria thought for a moment, looking at the street ahead of them. "A long time ago I understood that being bitter wasn't going to change anything. That if I was okay, Sophia was okay. And if Sophia was okay, any wait was worth it." Marcus read that. Then he typed something that took longer than usual. "I had everything I needed to be happy, and I wasn't. I never asked myself why." Valeria looked at him. "Maybe what happened to you wasn't a tragedy," she said quietly. "Maybe it was life trying to teach you something you never would have learned any other way." Marcus put his phone away, and they kept walking, in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the kind of silence that exists between two people who no longer need to fill the space to feel comfortable together. The improvement came on a Tuesday morning, before anyone expected it. Marcus was alone in the office. Valeria had stepped out to the hallway for a moment, and then he heard the sound of the air conditioning. He went completely still. Then he heard the noise of a car from the window, then footsteps somewhere in the hallway, then the reception phone ringing in the distance. Sounds, real, clear, the world coming back in. When Valeria walked in, she found him standing in the middle of the office with an expression she had never seen on him. "What happened?" she asked. Marcus looked at her. He opened his lips. "I can hear you," he said, and his own voice reached him like something unknown and completely familiar at the same time. Rough, small, new, as if it had been stored away for a long time and didn't quite know how to be used yet. "I can hear you," he repeated, and heard himself too. Valeria didn't know what to say. Marcus didn't either. They looked at each other for a moment that stretched longer than normal, longer than was strictly necessary, and then Valeria smiled. A genuine smile of relief, of something that was more than happiness and still didn't have a name. "That's really good," she said simply, and went to call the doctor. That night, Valeria arrived home and sat in the kitchen without turning on the television. Donna made tea without asking. They sat together in that silence that exists between mothers and daughters when both know there's something important to work through. "He's better," said her mom. It wasn't a question. "Yes," said Valeria. "And you?" Valeria looked at the tea. "I'm afraid that now that he doesn't need me, he'll go back to being who he was before." Donna nodded. "What if he doesn't?" Valeria didn't answer. Her mom put a hand over hers. "People change, honey," she said. "Sometimes for real. Sometimes they need something to break inside them to find what was always there." 3 days had passed since the recovery. Marcus was speaking again, hearing the world again. "Doctor." Shokoye confirmed the process had moved faster than expected, and Valeria sent him a message that night. "With your recovery, I don't think you're going to need what I was offering anymore. I think it's time for both of us to go back to our own lives." Marcus read that message. He sat in silence for a long time, and for the first time since he had recovered his voice, he didn't know what to say. The next day, at noon, he walked into the Millstone kitchen. The restaurant was full, the same smell, the same dark wood. Valeria was in the back clearing a table. When she saw him walk in, she stopped with the plates in her hands. Marcus walked to the center of the restaurant. Several customers looked at him. Some recognized him, and then, with a voice that still sounded a little new but was completely his, firm and without hesitation, he spoke. Not just to her, to everyone. "A few weeks ago," he said, and the restaurant began to go quiet table by table, "I walked in here and disrespected the most courageous person I have ever met in my life." Silence. Not because she had done anything wrong, because I was the kind of man who believed that money and power gave him the right to treat others as if they mattered less, and I was completely wrong. Eugene came out of the kitchen without making a sound. He stood near the kitchen door, hands clasped, watching. Sophia, who had come to eat with her grandmother that day, looked up from her plate. "What I lost that day," Marcus continued, and his voice was steady, even if not perfect, was not my voice. It was something far more important, and I got it back because of her. He looked at Valeria. "She taught me something that no one in 38 years had been able to teach me, that you can be strong and kind at the same time, that you can carry a great deal and still find reasons to smile. That the world isn't about winning. It's about how you treat people along the way." Valeria's eyes were bright. She didn't cry. Marcus took a step toward her. "She taught me that I want to be different. Not because I'm sick, not because it benefits me, but because I want to be. Because in these weeks I saw what it means to be the kind of person who makes the world a little better for the people around them." Pause. "Valeria," he said her name slowly, as if he'd been waiting a long time to say it that way. "I don't want you to be my interpreter. I don't want you to be my caregiver. I want you to be the person who reminds me, every day, who I want to be." The restaurant was completely silent. Sophia looked at her grandmother Donna, who had bright eyes and was squeezing her hand without realizing it. Then she looked at Marcus for a long few seconds, with that seriousness of hers that didn't ask anyone's permission, and she said, slowly, what everyone in that restaurant was waiting to hear. "I think he actually changed, Mom." An applause started on its own from a table in the back and spread through the restaurant until the whole room filled with it. Valeria looked at her daughter. She looked at Eugene, who nodded with the peace of someone who already knows how stories end when they're meant to end well. And then she looked at Marcus. "If you let me down," she said quietly, "I won't stay quiet about it." "I've never asked you to stay quiet," he answered. "You never have." Valeria smiled, a smile that started small and couldn't hold itself back. "Okay," she said, and that was all that was needed. The months that followed were not perfect. Marcus was still impatient, still direct to the point of bluntness, still needing someone to remind him now and then that people weren't obstacles. But he listened. He corrected an injustice at the company in front of everyone without anyone asking him to. He called his sister. The call lasted 45 minutes and ended with both of them promising not to let so much time pass again. Laura found on her desk, a month later, an envelope with a signed pay raise without having asked for anything. And Sophia, who was still Sophia, sometimes looked at him with that permanent evaluating expression of hers, and once in a while, just once in a while, she gave him a quiet approval that was worth more than any professional recognition he had ever received in his entire life. The last night of this story was not dramatic. It was at the Millstone kitchen after closing, with Eugene putting on some soft jazz from the old speaker behind the counter and the last customers already gone. Marcus and Valeria, at the same table where everything had begun. "This is where it all happened," said Marcus. "This is where it all changed," Valeria corrected. He nodded. "Do you think I would have learned it any other way?" Valeria thought for a moment, looking at the plants on the windowsills, the same ones as always. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes life doesn't take something away from you by accident." Marcus looked at her. "Sometimes it takes it away to teach you to be someone better." Eugene, from behind the counter, smiled to himself with the smile of someone who doesn't need to say anything for everything to be said. And outside, Hartfield kept its pace, without knowing that inside that small, warm restaurant, between hand-stitched napkins and windowsill plants, a man had learned the most important lesson of his life, not in a boardroom, not in a hospital, but in the voice of a woman who never stopped smiling, even when the world had given her every reason not to. Sometimes, life doesn't take something from you by accident. Sometimes, it takes it away, to teach you to be someone better. This story has come to its end, but you are still writing yours. What would you rate this story, from 0 to 10? Your opinion means a lot here. Leave it in the comments and tell me, which moment touched your heart the most? Until the next story.